try to we should try to show them and immerse them on what it looks like to be part of a community of practice meeting, because it does require a little bit of preparation before, some work during, and not just talking, but some work, reflection, action, and then the continuously engagement, right? And for that, some housekeeping for today is we're going to be using this platform, which is a little bit different than your regular PowerPoint, which is called Mural, which is a collaborative software that we're allowed to come in and everybody can work at the same time. It is really hard to make 50 people collaborate at the same time. That's why we invited a few. And so thanks very much, John and Richard and Holly, and some people also who accepted this invitation to be inside and start playing with social learning. So thanks for all of you. Stick with us. As you will notice today, communities of practice is not something structured to be right or wrong. This is connected seamlessly across the whole time. Sometimes we have to come back. Sometimes we're going to be lost in a messiness. But that's the beauty about learning and participating in something that we know where it starts, but not necessarily where it's going to end. So yeah, but who we are, who are the ones who are introducing these concepts and who wrote the chapters to you. As I said, my name is Tiago Duarte. I was born in Brazil. That's why the beautiful flag there. But I'm a proud Canadian. That's why my jersey. And I was fortunate enough to do my PhD and my master's under Dr. Diane Culver at the University of Ottawa. And I'm super excited on facilitating meaningful learning and using social learning as a tool to make the world a better place, especially when we talk about sports and coaching and all that good stuff.
So I'm Diane, clear my throat a bit here. I am near Montreal and Ottawa in a place called the Laurentians. And I'm very excited also to be part of this. And thank you, Tiago, for getting this going. So yeah, my thing for the last sort of 23 years has been about promoting social learning, and communities of practice is a type of space for social learning, mostly for change in sport. And sometimes I dip into other projects as well, but primarily sport.
Hi everyone, my name is Vinson. I lecture at the University of Worcester in the UK. And my experience with communities of practice and social learning has been probably not quite as long as Diane and Tiago, but probably ever since meeting Diane in person way back 2016, I think that was, Diane, I've definitely been infused. I've seen the light, as it were, and thought this is definitely the stuff for me. So certainly for the last 5 or 6 years, particularly, the vast majority of my research work and my consultancy work and the program evaluations that I engage with have been led or delivered through this lens. And I'm pretty convinced that there is a huge amount that we can take by exploring some of the concepts which we're going to try and introduce you to generally this evening. Yeah, Tiago, we can go on. So as you'll see from the mural that's happening in the background, what we're going to try and do with this concept this evening is to give you a little bit of a taster, either because you're participating and therefore you're going to be an active part of our discussions and deliberations this evening, or if you're just listening in, we'd like to showcase for you some of the ways in which we have found the delivery of the kind of concepts that we'll talk about this have been working really effectively. And Mural is just one of those tools. There are many, but Mural is a really good tool that helps us to develop social learning spaces in a collaborative and engaging way, hopefully. So we're going to show you a bit of that. It might be slick, it might be messy. Hey, who knows? we've sort of gone with this format because we thought this would be the most authentic way to try and introduce you to some of the concepts that we talked about in the chapter. So as you can see, Tiago is moving the map around a little bit at the moment, and I'm very grateful, particularly to the 5 who have put their hand up and said, yeah, we're willing to be a part of this chat this evening. And so this is our first activity that you see being populated in the background here. And what I'm going to ask the 5 to do is to introduce themselves a little bit and just talk us through just briefly, as you'll see on the map, where you're from and your interest in communities of practice. And it looks as though everybody has successfully identified where they're at on the map. So this is good. This means that Mural is working. So we could just kick off with a really brief introduction from those 5, if you would. Richard, would you like to go first for us? That would be brilliant.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, my name is Richard Bowles. I'm in Limerick in Ireland this evening. And I'm particularly interested in communities of practice. Well, I think there's two issues. One is in terms of my own research and looking at communities of practice in sports clubs, and then personally in my own coaching involvement to see how I might be able to facilitate a community of practice within my club. So I suppose I have those two motivations to be here this evening.
Great, Richard, thank you. And modestly, an expert in communities of practice already, I know, so we'll have a lot to learn from you. And similarly, another expert of coach development, certainly in the UK, John Wise. Good evening, my friend. How are you? And say hello.
Evening, and I don't know if I'd call myself an expert, but as you, Don, know, and as Jenny and Amy know, I love to network, and I love to kind of put myself out there to make connections with people. So I work primarily in the education space and support talent development with a variety of national governing bodies in England. Specifically, I've just actually come back from the FA WSL Academy final between Man United and Chelsea, just about an hour away from where I live. I also do some coach development work, so I've kind of met Don in a kind of previous incarnation doing some work with England hockey, but my passion is within British American football, where I've kind of done some coach education, coach development, and still have quite an active role in the development of the sport. So that's me.
Wonderful. That's lovely. Thank you, John. Holly, how about you?
Hiya. So I've just started a BSc in sports coaching. So I'm very new to a lot of academia. So I just really came on here to get more of an understanding of the kind of theoretical stuff that surrounds coaching. We have a community of practice at my university as well. So it's quite interesting to see how these two kind of marry up. So yeah, that's me.
Holly, that's amazing. We are thrilled that you're here. Thank you for joining. That's absolutely great. Shall we go to Ashley, so we break up the UK bias a little bit?
Awesome, sounds good. Hi everyone, I'm Ashley. I'm in Canada. I'm in actually a very small place, New Brunswick, on the Atlantic coast. And I think that's part of what influences my interest in communities of practice, because in terms of mental performance consultants, it's starting to grow, but not as many in New Brunswick. And so really being able to connect with others, and through my practice, as well as some teaching that I do online teaching. And so I'm really interested in web-based collaborative environments to be able to communicate as part of supporting communities of practice. And I love the idea of the mural, because it's one of those aspects that can support that in the online environment. So thanks for having me.
Great. And thank you particularly for your for last minute volunteering. We love that. Thank you very much. Finally, then back to Amy, who everybody knows, but Amy, say a little bit about yourself and your aspirations for this webinar.
Thanks, Don, and thanks to Diane and Tiago for delivering this session. Yeah, if people don't already know, I'm one of the co-editors of the Myths of Sport Coaching book. I'm a reader, associate prof at Liverpool John Moores University in sports psychology and coaching, and do quite a lot of coach development work. I think my aspirations based from this chapter and from this webinar is to kind of dispel some of the misconceptions of communities of practice, because even I've made the mistake of using the term community of practice when it's not being a community of practice. So to be able to kind of articulate what a community of practice is not, and what it is, and how we can embed that more effectively within the students that I work with, the coaches that I work with, and within the university.
Amazing. Thank you to you five particularly. To everybody else, we've taken the time to introduce these five because the five are going to be contributing to some of our other tasks as we go through this evening, and it's good to know them, and you'll get to know them a little bit better, and we'll get to know each other a little bit better as we progress onwards. So great, thank you for that first bit. I'm going to hand back over to Tiago, who's going to take us on from there.
Much done. I'm so thrilled. I'm so excited because we came with this idea, and then right now I'm already getting to know someone from New Brunswick that I have never met, some people from the UK, and this is what social learning is all about. It's getting to know what kind of people we have in the room. And so you might be thinking, that's great. We have a community of practice then. Oh, not so fast, not so fast. So one thing that actually I got a little bit of a problem with that is when I was reading the book from Wenger at a time, before he got married, after he became Wenger trainer, just to make our lives as academics worse, because we had to explain that in everything we do. So Wenger was writing in his 1998 book, Communities of Practice. He was mentioning that we belong to many different communities of practice without even perceiving and without even knowing. And it clicked it turned the lights, and yes, amazing, everything is a community of practice. But that's not necessarily true. If you see the slide here, we have this small cartoon that says we do stuff together, we get ideas, tips, tools, friendships, a network. So right now we are already engaging with people from across the globe. And we realize that some of them are in the same field of us, of coach development for sure, or mental performance. So it is sport, it is excellence, it is development. So we kind of like, okay, that goes. I think it is. I think it's becoming a community of practice. I think that's what it is. But we also need to pay attention, okay, but that's not exactly it. It's not because we are having a conference that, and that happened to us before, the coffee break was called Community of Practice break. That's not it. Although we would love if many communities of practice could be created through that, it is not necessarily what encompasses. Just getting to know people who share a passion is not enough to be considered a community of practice. But then the question is, okay, but what are communities of practice then? And to simply define, I don't want to, bring too much definition. This is supposed to be a very applied workshop or session today. A community of practice is an initiative to connect people with passion for learning, developing, and growing together related to their practice. And when we think about learning together, it involves making meaning of what is being said, making meaning of the cultural practices, making meaning of what's going on surrounding us. But it's also a matter of identity. So I love when Ashley said, like, well, I'm an NPC, there's not many here in New Brunswick, and I would like to connect with people to understand what to do and where to go. Because you can only see yourself as part of a professional group if you're able to connect, if you're able to network, and if you talk the talk, and if you walk the walk. So I think I'm going to stop from here because I know Diane is going to keep tackling some great pieces on that.
Thanks.
With you, Diane.
Okay, so just the next slide is a cartoon that is you'll recognize a little bit from the slide that you had 2 times ago with Tiago, what is not a community practice, but this is the rest of the story. So yes, if you go in the top left, we like to do stuff together because we want to make a difference. I love being with others who recognize the difference I want to make and who appreciate my uncertainty. So there's that important element of uncertainty. I get ideas, tips, tools, friendship, and a network, but I also take those back and put them to use in my practice. And I pay attention to the effect of that, which I then take this back to my group of people who also want to make a difference. So in the next, it's a cycle. It's like an action learning cycle, which is a combination of collective and individual reflection related to each practice that the person has. So you're going to recognize some of these terms because we're going to talk about making a difference. We're going to talk about uncertainty, and we're going to talk about paying attention as we go through the next slides and activities. So right into the first activity, actually, second activity, I guess, after Where in the World, is the caring to make a difference. So what's this caring to make a difference about? Well, this is like the glue that kind of holds us together as a social learning group, okay? And it keeps our interest in participating. The difference doesn't always have to be, first of all, it doesn't need to be humongous, world-changing difference. It can be big or it can be small. It's related to that passion in the definition of communities of practice. And not in a social learning space, we don't always have a care to make a difference about exactly the same thing, but it's around the same topic. So we're with others who care about that topic. We enjoy being with them. And normally over time, we're going to share about ourselves and build trust. And then, like was alluded to at the beginning by Tiago, it's not just about sharing, it's about also doing this exercise of individual and collective learning, which will take us to a place where we may not know where we're going to be at the beginning. So the curriculum is not decided ahead of time. It is decided by the needs of the people in the social learning space or community practice. So for this first activity, if you look here, I gave an example. These 3 questions here are important questions that you can ask yourself about this difference you want to make. So what keeps you up at night? So I took the example of women in coaching because I do a lot of research and practice around that. And the next, who do I need to involve if I want to make a difference in this? So I have to think about the people that are influencers in this domain who can change the situation for women in coaching. And so I say that, those people are like their sport organizations, their, whoops, I can't quite see, it's really small, but hold on, I got to go to my own one so I can see it better. I put funders, in other words, the people in sport who provide funding for projects and initiatives, and also people on the ground. And then finally, I can ask myself, where do I want to start? Well, I probably have to start by, like I mentioned, building relationships together, involving decision makers and involving practitioners. So that is really an exercise that we'd like you, our mural participants, to think about. And right now, double click, put your name up there. Amy's already done it. John, double click on those Post-its in your column and answer those questions. And we would also invite the general participants, not on the mural group, if they feel so inclined, to just write their name, where they are, and what is the difference that they would care to make in the chat. So we're going to give a little bit of time for this. And if anybody has any questions as we're going through, please do pop them in the chat. I know that Jen is paying attention to those questions, and we will try and respond as best that we can. So again, for those of you in the Zoom room, please feel free to go and use the chat and put your name, where you're from, and what is the difference that you would care to make. Thank you. I see Harley Jean Simpson. Environment for learning. Okay, so we might once Amy, John, Richard, Holly have finished, we might just quickly get, since Ashley, we finished first, we'll get you to start and just maybe briefly explain to us what those are. Thanks, Glenn. You want to support coaches in Canada and coach developers. So we start with this idea of caring to make a difference, because this is what, you know, the question, what keeps you up at night, is the great way to start if you're trying to create a community of practice, because it definitely gets to the point of what your participants care about. And this is what will drive your social learning space. Thank you, Vid and Irene. Okay, let's go with Ashley. Do you want to quickly go through your 3 questions, please?
Sure. This is something that I've been speaking a lot about with a local sport and performance center that I'm working with, and it's about really creating caring sport environments. So caring environments within like youth sport organizations or university sport, just really across the board, but just creating caring climates. And so that's one thing that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about lately. We, have talked about and some to people involved, sport organizations, certainly, provincially and nationally, locally. I think that we certainly could make some gains in involving coaches and athletes, mental performance consultants and sports psychologists. And then in terms of sort of getting started, certainly engaging in discussions, collaborating, listening, speaking about what caring environments might look like, what caring environments don't look like, maybe sharing to the book some myths around, different types of sport climates, and then certainly education for those that are leading and developing those organizations. And that could include coaches, athletes, parents, and certainly engaging policymakers.
Nice, thank you very much. Yeah, so I think we have time to go to somebody else. This maybe John, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I probably need to phrase mine in terms of mine is about following an evidence-influenced and an evidence-based approach to things that we do, not just obviously totally fired up by the great book that Jenny and Amy have put together, but just to try and be quite evangelical about bashing some of the myths that exist, like learning styles, and just trying to be even more evidence informed in everything we do. So I put the first comment was my chronotype. Being into American football, I stay up late at night watching the NFL when it's on, and I think I've just developed that as a kind of like a body set and a body clock set. So again, that's me trying to use some sort of evidence informed to justify being on the mural at about 1:10 this morning in the AM in the UK. The key is that all that you want me to talk about there, Diane, or?
Well, you can go through your 2 other post-its there, I guess.
So the key people that I think I've realized, and again, I had a conversation with somebody in education at the weekend about how they've developed an evidence-informed approach within their school. And they said, you need to go and talk to your college principal, because she will drive changes to the head of teaching learning, to my line manager, to various other people. So I've got an opportunity in the next couple of weeks to do some collaborative work with our college principal to actually, as I've put a bit lower down, to sort of plant some seeds and to kind of question her about her take on things and how we can probably coerce the college to go in the way that I think they probably want them to go to as well. And then I've also highlighted the CEO of the British American Football Association and a few other key influencers to kind of do the coach development work. And then in answer to the third question, I think for quite a while, I've planted lots of seeds knowing that I'm in this for the long game, and that actually some of those shoots are starting to kind of show elements of productivity and effectiveness as well.
That's great, John. Thank you so much for that. This actually really brings an interesting dimension to the conversation, because while, a social learning space or community practice can be a very, quite a kind of contained learning space, your 3 post-its remind me of the concept of landscapes of practice, which is a much broader take on social learning, which a landscape of practice can involve a whole bunch of different social learning spaces, including different communities of practice. So, and your idea of talking to line managers and principals and so on, and planting seeds, that all is totally in line with the type of strategic conversations that you need to have when you're trying to create change across a landscape, rather than just in a really more local community of practice type idea. I think we have time to do one more. So volunteer, Amy, Richard, or Holly?
I'll go.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, I'm just going to jump back onto the questions. So what keeps me up at night? So I'm working on a project or at the minute around how do we link into Ashley's about care, how do athletes feel cared for and safe within their environments. I guess in terms of who needs to be involved, we're looking directly at how coaches care for their athletes and how coaches make or help athletes feel safe in their environment. And then to kind of where we start, we've already started kind of doing a little bit of research around this, engaging in discussions with coaches, putting out surveys, and just to get an overall feel for what does the landscape look like in terms of, do coaches already feel like they do care or they are caring, and does there need to be some education around this? And just linking to this, sorry, this is shameless, but Colin Cronin is coming next month to talk about care and coaching.
I thought of that when Ashley said her thing. Y'all got to come back next month and listen to that, because it's a really great link. Okay, so we probably have about 2 minutes here if anybody has a question about this activity or about what it means, caring to make a difference.
Can I
Anybody?
jump in then? I do have
Yes.
a question. Actually, I have a comment. This is something very characteristic of community of practice. We ask people to leave their egos outside, but then people are not used to promote what they do and what they're passionate about, which is the opposite of what you want. Amy, thanks for sharing that. Maybe many of us didn't know that you have a book coming who tackles that passion of yours. And if we want a community to form, if we want social learning to transit across the landscape, as Diane was saying, we need to create moments and opportunities in which attendees are going to have a say and are going to say, you know what, I'm passionate about that. I'm passionate about safe sport. And you might talk to, again, Ashley, she's talking about caring sport environments. How connected is this? And we didn't choose for that. The same way as Holly and Diane, both of them care about sports for women. So let me let other people who have questions raise their hands. But I got too excited. I apologize.
Well, I just want to, I see, I hope I say your name right, Adia in Liverpool, put in the chat that she wants to create sporting and coaching environment that is designed for marginalized communities and empowers them rather than othering them. That's so great, because that is actually what, this concept of communities practice has been used an awful lot in social development projects, because it is community-based and driven by the needs of the people who are most impacted by the practice. So you're right on the mark there with that. Adia. Again, sorry if I got your name right. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, I guess we can move on to the 7 steps. Don?
Yeah, so the 7 steps, the diagram that you're going to see on the slide here, this is taken from a document which Diane helped put together, and you can Google search for this. You can also, I think we'll provide you a link to it, where this is a really good resource document on how to form communities of practice. And the 7 steps here, I'm just going to go through these very briefly in the hope that if you're interested in setting up these kind of spaces, this might give you something to potentially take away. So the first step there is plan. That might seem fairly obvious, and there are some obvious logistics and other things that you might need to plan for. You might need to think about some funding for the space. Who is going to facilitate the space in terms of who's going to pull the agenda together, who is going to do that level of organization. But another important part to this might be thinking about the call, essentially. Etienne and Bev would call this a convening call, essentially. We might not just want an open space that is just a very open invite. Actually, a call might be quite targeted, thinking about who we might want to engage with the kinds of discussions that are going to help us eventually to make a difference. So we might think about how we might give voice to people who need to have voice in these kind of spaces. We might think about the different hierarchical or political levels that we might need to engage in a space and how that might be convened most effectively. So there's quite a bit that might go into that planning. And I guess one of the myths that we're dispelling is this isn't an easy solution that you just throw something out there and just run with it. Actually, this can be as a result of something that's very carefully constructed, very carefully thought through, and might well require actually quite a considerable degree of forethought and planning. You're then going to need to train people. And again, this is perhaps something that might be quite different to your experiences of communities of practice. Certainly things where I've jumped into communities of practice, often this isn't a part. And we think this is actually quite important. We're going to go through some roles in the next section. And we think it's important that we might actually help people to understand how they might contribute to a space and what those kind of roles might entail if they're going to do that effectively. And we might need to train people to do that and to not only to use tools like Mural or others, but actually there are some other functions. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. The second level of design then, I guess, on from planning, once you've decided or found out who's in the space, who's put their hands out, who's coming, is to start very deeply thinking about, well, what's going to work for this group? Is it online? Is it in person? Is it hybrid? Is it something that's going to happen on a weekly, monthly, or an irregular basis? At what time? How are we going to engage people in a way that is meaningful, respectful of their time, and useful? As we start to implement our space then into step 4, we're putting into place, obviously, the things that we have both planned and designed. And we can start to get a feel for how the group perhaps is running at that stage. You'll note in the middle there's this negotiate. That is a step that actually affects so many of these other blocks in this space. And it's important that the social learning space that you're creating, you're remembering that actually this is a flexible beast. It's something that will need to evolve and change. It's not something that you will have planned at the start and just runs that way all the way through. It just doesn't happen like that. It will need to be negotiated and evolved and changed as the time goes on. At some point it might need to be wound up and finished. And all of those things are an important part of running the space. In order to do that negotiation and that implementing really well, you're going to need to assess how things are running. You're going to need to work out whether the space is being effective. And you will hopefully in your planning and designing stage have worked out what it is going to take to be effective. What data are you going to pay attention to? Speaking to you, John, in terms of how can we be evidence informed? What are you going to pay attention to? What are you going to look at in order to assess whether this space is being effective? And then finally, very quickly into maintain. How do we start or how do we continue to think about the life of the group? How do we foster its onward journey and development? Can we go deeper? Can we have a even more profound impact with the differences that we're caring to make if we start to layer it and develop it more strategically? And again, thinking about the legacy and the perhaps the ongoing funding for programs such as this. So that's a whistle stop, and there's lots else we could talk to about that, but we're going to go on to some of those stages now as we get into some COP roles, which we think are pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks, Don. So I I did put the link to the coach.ca website, which has that full document that the model is part of. It's in the chat if anybody's interested in it. And so the next little bit of important information that we'd like to share is about the different roles that you want to think about. This is part of your planning and designing stages of the model when you are setting up or getting your community of practice going. So the first one, which we will come back to a little bit when we talk about paying attention, is the idea that in order to, it's very important to pay attention to the value created. One, for the reason of assessment, which is, in other words, if the FA decides they're going to do a community of practice for women coaches, they're probably, they've got somebody, an employee who's involved in it. There's time investment. There's also maybe some other types of investment, bringing coaches together and so on. So they're going to want to know whether this is making a difference or not. So there's that important aspect of being a value detective, is that assessment or evaluating aspect. But another really important aspect is that this is a critical part of deep learning, because as you're paying attention to the value being created through the activities of the social learning space, you are creating value stories that you can feed back into the social learning space. You're paying attention to, so remember back to the cartoon where people are, muddling around together in their uncertainty, then taking these ideas out, putting them into their practice, paying attention to what happens, and then bringing them back to the group. This is all part of that paying attention to the value being created and deepening the learning. Now, other roles that are important for sustaining a community of practice are, there's this idea of shared leadership and facilitation, which leads to a better sense of shared ownership and accountability. So for instance, you can have community keepers that you can see there, the person with the megaphone there and the others. And these keepers, their role is to make sure that all voices within the community are being heard. You could also have agenda activists who are paying attention to what is addressed and what still needs to be addressed in terms of those needs of the community through the activities that you're doing. You could have social reporters, which are busy creating a shared memory, which is like a history of the learning that's taking place within the community. And you can also have, particularly if you have some external funders or groups outside of your community that need to know what's going on, you can have external messengers where they are within the group, but they are crafting what communication needs to go to key stakeholders. So those are some of the idea of distributed leadership that will help you make your community of practice more successful. And these roles they can be, discussed within the community and decided upon. They can be rotated. They don't have to be the same person all the time. Maybe, for a month or so, you do one role and then you switch to a different role. So that's the roles. And I think now we move on to paying attention. That's Tiago.
Yes, thanks, Diane. And as you see below here, when we start to include those roles, in order to pay attention in a better way, involving everyone to see, okay, we need to pay attention, but what for? Then it becomes clear that myth number 3, COPs are not an easy solution, because it's not just about having, or let's say before as well, it's not just about having a master practitioner, to guide and to organize a COP. It's about involving the community on understanding what it needs to be done to keep it, to report the benefits, to stay on track, and to find the values that are actually being created. And recently, a few years back, the Wenger trainers, they proposed this framework And this framework, it's called value creation framework, which is governed by some values, but it's not in terms of, as the quote here, value refers to importance, worth, or usefulness than moral standards, even if the two are related. So the types of values we're talking about is strategic, transformative, enabling, orienting, and then in between we have those pairs, immediate and potential, applied, and realized. And what do they stand for? Well, first of all, it's easy for people to make connections with, let's say, we're going to have a webinar. And then we're going to send, a feedback report. How do you like the presentation? Were the facilitators engaging enough? Was it easy to follow? Did you find it beneficial? Ranking. Well, this is one way to assess. But when we're trying to create a community of practice, we need to understand, okay, what is the experience like? When people come and join this community, are they allowed to speak? Or there's only one person who has the voice and they just, are replicating and parroting everything that is being said? So is it enjoyable? Are you forced to be there, or is volunteer? So I hope that so far you are able to create some immediate value. You are enjoying being part of this community, being part of this, maybe not community yet, but being part of this workshop here. Because, well, you are learning, potentially learning something. So the question is, what comes out of it? And it could be something you never heard about. It could be the document that Diane just shared on the chat. Thanks, Coach Canada, for putting together this piece with Diane and publishing it on their website. So the value could be potential if you will have access to it. Well, I just met John and Richard, but it is still potential. Why? Because if I never send an email to John or Richard, I wasn't able to apply, which is the next value. So what are you actually doing with what you have gained or what you have learned from this opportunity, right? And then realize, if I pay more attention, if I look of, okay, I came to this meeting, I connected on Zoom. It sounds fun, I'm not sleeping so far, so that's good. It's engaging. I have access to a PDF from Coach Canada. That's good. I used any information there to plan my own community of practice. And unfortunately, I invited people, nobody came. So the realized value, maybe it's missing. But as you pay attention and you're able to reflect and feedback the process and share that with the people you're trying to engage with this community, you're going on the cartoon that Diane mentions. It's an action reflection cycle and circle. So you keep learning from that. Even if it doesn't produce, let's say, a realized value, you're still learning from that experience. At least one way of what not to do, or you learn how to negotiate, as Don was saying, and to make adjustments and to plan again and to try in a different way. Of course, we have all those other values that there are amazing publications. We have articles, there are free access that we are also going to share with you on the chat that talks specifically about using this framework, not only to assess, but also what we call and what Wenger calls to frame a community of practice or to frame a social learning intervention. So you're going to be exposed to that. So based on this aspect of paying attention, I'd like to ask a question to all of you listening, which is, what values this activity here is creating? So please, Ashley, John, Richard, take your time to answer that. And if it's too complicated, maybe think, okay, what value can you create, or should you be paying attention to when creating your own communities and social learning spaces at your organizations? Is it the engagement? Is it the participation numbers? Is it the culture, people enjoying being together? And it's interesting, when I was doing my PhD at the start of my research process, it was in 2016. And my participants on the community of practices that we created, they have an average 58 years old. Majority of them were already retired. We had a few out of the curve, 2 young people who bumped down our age average. And we have to learn how to use Zoom, and we have to learn how to use Basecamp, and we have to learn how to use a few things a few years before the pandemic hit. So when the pandemic started, they started laughing and say, "You see, Tiago, we already know all how those webinars and meetings work out." So sometimes we're not even considering about the value we were creating about teaching technology. But moving forward, you realize that this was very handy for many of them who had to conduct their work entirely online. So who would like to share with us? I'm going to put you on the spot, Richard. Would you like to share a little bit?
Thanks, Tiago. Yeah. I've been just trying to put down some random thoughts here because I've used the framework a little bit before, and every time I come to use it, I kind of struggle with where I put particular things. So as I'm thinking here and as I'm writing, I think first of all, this exercise has been really useful so far, just to think about my own practice as I'm listening and hearing more about communities of practice. At a very fundamental level, using Mural for the very first time, I'm certainly learning something here from that, which I think I might use in the future. But I think most importantly for me, being in a group like this, where I'm hearing what other people are doing, how they are trying to develop communities of practice, I'm thinking about how I can make links to my own practice. And I'm guessing in some ways this may relate to what Diane was talking about, landscapes as well. So that hearing what's happening in other contexts, I'm trying to apply it to my own experience and how it might be useful for me.
Sharing. And if you do have a question, that's the moment. Feel free to pose that to us. I think while the others are thinking, feel free.
Yeah.
Would you like to give it a try?
Yeah. I suppose if we go back to the framework, I think the area I struggle most with when we look at the framework is moving from the potential to the applied. So I can see lots of things from our discussion so far tonight that I can see as potential value, but I'm wondering what I need to do to turn those kind of things into applied value. I suppose it's thinking about that action reflection cycle that Don mentioned. So in your experiences, how within a community of practice do we maybe progress through the cycles to see the different values that are created? That's
a great question. And I remember how many days and hours and months I wrap around of trying to understand if it was necessary from one value to go all the way to transformative, let's say. And what the theory mentions is that one value is not more important than the other. And it's not required to create transformative learning, let's say, for something to be cherished. So just by being able to see that others also struggle the same way, just like Ashley mentioned, she was like, there's not many NPCs at my place. And when she starts to realize that, wow, this is a global problem. There's still so much to be done, and it's still a growing problem. By itself, the immediate value of just seeing themselves as, okay, I'm not alone. This is a common experience. Thanks, Diane, for sharing that. MPC stands for Mental Performance Consultant. So it is by itself valid. There's not hierarchy on that. Although I do understand. So if the easier example is mural. So how do you utilize the learning from digital mural on the meeting? Well, you have to put it to work and see if it works for yourself, because not everybody is going to have the same access to computers, the same access to subscriptions as well. And also keeping in mind that even on our own research with Diane and myself, it took sometimes a full year for some of the coaches to apply what they have learned during the community meetings. Sometimes it's because of timing. So if we're talking about nutrition strategy 2 weeks before a competition, it could be usually applied, right? Well, the nutritionist is talking about bringing Gatorade, bringing more veggies, and bringing whatever it is, or having a nutritional plan in which athletes will be, provided with something to use. It could be as simple as that. But once you become a little bit of a detective, a value detective, you start understanding that, well, you know what, this potential is going to take way longer to materialize and be applied for us to see the connections between the result or not. So being patient is a big aspect of it, but having this mindset of using the vocabulary and trying to find what types of values.
Thanks, Tiago. I think what I find really useful then from that is the idea of value creation stories, that by using the framework to think about what's happening in our practices, I think makes it a little bit easier to tell the story about that practice and maybe get some deeper insights then as a result.
Yes, actually, you hit it in the head. Amazing. That's it. This is a key word that Richard Dush mentioned. Value creation story is when it's just this, our story is created from what I try to do with that example, that we learn something immediately and then potentially we put it to apply and we're able to create a story like that. It's a great way to communicate the values that were found. Thank you. So Polly, would you like to give it a try? I think we do have time for one more person.
So I guess I've mentioned earlier when I introduced myself that I'm part of a community of practice within my university. And I think what's key to highlight on this model, because I haven't seen the model before, is that engagement. They've put the time on our timetable. It's at the end on a Friday. And like a lot of uni students, you don't want to be around at the end of the day on a Friday. There's a massive gap between our last lecture and, have about 2-hour break. So I think a lot of the people who go there are very much the same people. You do get some who drop in and out, but generally you do have the same people who do arrive every single week. And a lot of it is will go on your attendance, so you have to be there, rather than that it's forcing people to go to the community of practice rather than inviting people. And I think that's probably where my university has gone a little bit wrong, because actually it becomes a bit constricting. You don't want to go there, you don't want to be there, and it doesn't allow the freedom for people to share their ideas within that space.
You know what? That's a great example. That within the theory, there is what they call indigenous communities and some structured communities. Indigenous is this environment that is created. On the first book, they talks about midwives, and they talk actually about clerks, so insurance clerks. You know, the way you talk to someone during your lunchtime allows you to learn something from a a hard case, or for a city customer, or whatever it is. And one of the aspects that you should be paying attention is, like, sometimes people are too concerned about learning as a cognitive way, in a cognitive aspect. We also need to learn in an emotional level. So do you like being part of the group of people you're being with? And forcing them to participate could be questionable. I think the idea is still great, because you don't know, in some of those conversations you might find, wow, I'm a cat person, you're a cat person, oh my gosh, there's so much that we can engage. So then, after I trust you, I feel comfortable with you, I'm able to share a little bit more of what I've been thinking on the place of vulnerability, let's say, right, on my actual profession or soon to be profession experience. So it is okay that every group dynamics starts a little bit with with people having different stages in order to gain trust and in order to start collaborating. And it's like that in any type of social groups. So again, sometimes having a little bit of benches and leaving the aspect of, okay, this is a group that we're mainly talking about theory or academia or work. No, we can talk about cats, we can talk about dogs. The agenda activist might even say, okay, we have to have an energizer activity or a fun activity every meeting, so people can enjoy themselves and feel better. Okay, Dawn, would you like to jump in on this, or Diane as well? I think the time I had planned for this activity already passed, but we still have
maybe one more minute. I'll just say that, you'll see the word indicators on the mural here. It really is, part of those different roles that you can assign, or the whole group can engage in this, is thinking about the indicators ahead of time that you may be able to pay attention to in order to A, evaluate what's going on in terms of learning, and B, to deepen the learning. So, an example, sometimes you have to really look hard for these things. They're not always obvious, and you have to be careful not to, as Dawn put in the chat, you can't really force people to engage. People engage because they want to engage, but sometimes engagement, it doesn't look obvious from the outside. So in one study that Tiago was doing, and they had all these online activities and meetings, but they also had a shared space online where they shared a lot of different documents and so on. And when he did the exit interviews for this, there was one particular person who never really seemed to step in, like she was there during the meetings, but she didn't contribute anything during the meetings. And so he assumed that, she probably didn't get that much out of it. And when he asked her, how her experience was, and she said, oh, I've been on that website like at least twice a week all summer for my planning for next season. I've got so much out of it. So you can't always tell ahead of time, what that value is going to look like and what engagement looks like. It can look quite different, but there's the idea that the paying attention is something you can also in part set up in those planning and design phases. You could use the value creation framework to help you design good learning spaces. So we probably should move on to, so we've talked about caring to make a difference, and we've talked about paying attention. Now we're going to go back and talk a little bit about this idea of engaging uncertainty. So this is like probably the concept I would say that most people can relate to, them wanting to make a difference. They can relate to paying attention, but they're not so sure about the engaging in uncertainty. What does it mean? Well, in actual fact, a community of practice or a social learning space is a place for participants to address their uncertainties about making that difference they want to make. It can relate to what it means, whether or not it's worth making that difference or even possible to make that difference, and especially what's the process to go about making that difference. We're not talking here about some kind of radical skepticism or some denial of all facts. That's not what it is. It is, and it's a quote from your trainer, it's a state of being in tension between caring to make a difference and having a clear path to get there. So there's this sort of state of being open to being uncertain about where we want to go. And it's in that uncertainty and in the engagement with that uncertainty that you will end up going somewhere where you didn't know you were going to go before. And when I say you, I'm talking about the space in general. So this is an important aspect of one of the myths related to COPs can become echo chambers. This is a partially true myth. It can be, and there have been a lot of criticism saying that it just ends up reproducing knowledge that already exists. This can happen if things get prescriptive or if egos aren't left at the door. If, say, a person of high status kind of intrudes on that social learning space, they can stunt it by jumping in and filling up that uncertain space before people have a chance to really engage in it, to really talk about potential things they might try, to go out and try it in their practice, to bring it back. So social learning spaces and communities practice can be quite fragile. And there's a lot of talk about vulnerability in coaching now. Well, most contexts see uncertainty as a weakness or some kind of incompetence. But that's not actually true in a social learning space. We need to be vulnerable. We need to be allowed to express our uncertainty about things. And then it's also practitioners work in a complex context. It's like Schoen talks about the messy, the swampy land of practice. So this idea of uncertainty also applies to practical knowing, because there's oftentimes in practice, there is a lack of all the information that we need in order to make decisions. So uncertainty is appropriate, and it's appropriate to engender and engage in learning in the 21st century. So I think now we're going to pass it over to Don, who's going to talk a little bit about a mind map.
Yeah, Tiago, if you would zoom in for us a little bit on my mind map there. And all I was just going to try and do with this in just a couple of minutes is to demonstrate, if you like, my uncertainty with a project that I'm working on at the moment with one of my colleagues at my university. And it's a really exciting project. And I thought hopefully it would be a good example of engaging uncertainty, because it feels a little bit like we don't know how this is going to shape up. We don't know how to make this happen yet. So there are just a few blobs here, which I'm going to talk about. The premise is we've been asked, and we've kind of volunteered to develop a coaching academy in Worcester and for Worcester in the UK. And by Worcester, we perhaps mean the city and the surrounding area. And we're quite excited about the prospect of setting this up. And we know that we want this space to be something which is going to be founded on the principles of social learning. But there's all kinds of factors here in our initial planning that I've tried to give you an indication of on the screen here, of which we are uncertain, and we are having to engage our uncertainty in. For example, we know that there is a coaching plan coming in the UK, a coaching plan 2.0, and this is going to be produced by Sport England, and it's sort of coming and it's nearly there, and we kind of know what it's going to say. But at the same time, we don't know quite what that is going to be like. And that's going to be an important factor for us as we try and understand the political climate that we're trying to speak into. We have a number of developments that are affecting our space here. So we are building at the university an inclusive centre for cricket. and this is coming. It's coming perhaps in 12 months' time or so. We're hoping it's going to be quite a major initiative, and the inclusive cricket teams from England are going to be based out of this venue. Well, it hasn't arrived yet, and we don't know who those people are going to be, but we know we're going to try and create a space for them. But we don't know, therefore, what their needs are going to be, and what they're going to be engaged or wanting from engagement with this kind of thing. There are lots of other stakeholders that we're going to try and engage in this process. We need to engage our local sports partnerships, our local clubs, some other franchises and other things in our local sphere that all have a stake perhaps in the potential success of developing a social learning coaching academy. And whatever different groups might come out of this and whatever different spaces might be created in trying to pull this together, we're certainly trying to recognize at the moment that we don't know exactly what this is going to look like. We don't quite know what people's needs are going to be yet, or how we're going to perhaps lever some support or funding or whatever that might be from some of the other major stakeholders in this. And in creating this and planning for this environment, hopefully we are engaging our uncertainty to say, we don't know all the answers yet, and we're going to have to negotiate with people and find out from people as we go on what these things are likely to be. So this isn't a perfect example because it's not illustrative necessarily of a social learning space, but it's the beginnings of engaging our uncertainty in how we might think and plan for it. And hopefully that gives some illustration of what that might start to look like. Tiago, I think we are on to you.
Fantastic. So as you can see, we're going to have a few minutes to think about our takeaways. So, and we'd like to ask for those who would like to share on the chat, one thing you took from today, someone just deleted, that you cannot trust on technology other than that. So the question is, one thing that you learned from today that you can take home. Write down, for the mirror people, please write down, and for the other participants on Zoom, please write down as well. And so one of our main goals with this activity today was to leave a little bit of the space of the webinar, as we know, in which one person speaks, the majority listens. At the end, there's sometimes 5 minutes for questions. And just like the example Holly just mentioned, sometimes you even want to ask questions, but you're time crunched. You have to take the bus, or you know, if you don't leave right now, you're gonna be late at home, and then and life goes on, right? Sometimes we simply don't have the time to spare to ask a professor or to ask a teacher or to join a group with colleagues, just to socially engage with them. And this is an invitation I'd like to make. So Diane just posted on the chat a link to a Google Docs file in which you can write other questions you have about it. And you can write what is your passion, what is the area would you like to develop. And maybe you can find other people. So our invitation is go there, fill it in. It's just a few simple questions. It's nothing complicated. And try to move on with this, saying, well, I know that Ashley is a mental performance consultant. I know that John, if he's there, John, works as a consultant also in UK. I know that Diane, Tiago, and Dawn, they are involved with communities of practice and social learning. So these encounters, this space to speak and to be heard, they are just the beginning. It's just a seed that we're planting, but it takes time to nurture in community of practice, or any type of relationship if you want it to be fruitful. So feel free to join. Let's see some of the answers here. What our participants have written. Anyone would like to say a few words?
Sure. I think a big takeaway for me was, and I think I said it at the outset, one of my interest is in supporting online communities of practice, just because where I'm at locally, a lot of the people that I interact and engage with, certainly on a professional level, is in an online environment. And so I loved the idea of using Mural, being introduced to it and experiencing it, just to be able to help support that type of online engagement in communities of practice. And also in terms of what Diane said, I researched shared athlete leadership during my graduate studies. And it's something now that I continue to be interested in and help teams develop shared and distributed leadership. And so connecting shared leadership and distributed forms of leadership with communities of practice really resonated with me and really kind of made a really strong connection. So I really enjoyed that conversation.
Thanks. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Who else would like to share from the Mural?
I'd be happy to share.
Go ahead, please.
Similar to kind of what Richard's put there as well, is embracing the uncertainty. So I would say in general probably agree that I'm quite a control freak. So just to chill out a bit and allow for, you know, people to throw in kind of random, and, you know, if you're talking about cats and dogs or whatever, because to allow that to happen, because that could then generate like new thoughts, new ideas, and allow for that creativity to happen.
Yeah, Amy, I'm glad you said that, because it is something that does require a high comfort level with sort of not knowing exactly where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if I had to say one thing around keeping, you know, the one thing to do around keeping it moving forward is to always be sure that you're coming back to the learning needs and the learning imperative of the group, checking in on that on a regular basis.
Thanks, Diane. I'm just writing that down.
So we have time too for questions from the general group as well. So please, you know, we've got a few more minutes.
Yeah, Diane, actually, so there's some gold comments on the chat. So take the time to read a few of them. And I think it would be good if we replicate Vit's, and I hope I'm speaking your name properly, Vit's question, which is, let me get there. Are there some limits for how many people is COP ideal? 5, 10, 20, 50 people? And then Diane answered on the chat. Would you like to replicate that answer, Diane, for us live?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, I definitely wouldn't start with a COP of 100 plus people. It was my first shot. but there are communities of practice of over 100 people. You know, large engineering companies, for instance, will have a community of practice of a certain, you know, machine operator that works in the mines that they own all over the world. But essentially, yes, that you can have over 100 people. But you're never going to expect that the people will, like I mentioned before, with the curling coach and the fact that we didn't know if she was engaging, you'll never have the engagement being equal. And that depends not just on, you know, what the person's life, what's going on in the person's life, but also, you know, for instance, maybe it's a sports coach whose team is not in season or something, or they're an assistant coach, so they don't have the ability to necessarily implement the changes that they're learning about at that particular time. But also depends on the topic, you know, like it's driven by the learner's needs in the group. But that's not to say that everybody's going to be equally engaged with every topic or subject that you're dealing with. So that you know, if you have 100 people, they're not all going to be engaging the same way.
Please, John, I saw your hand raised.
I thought I'd do a polite etiquette rather than just unmute and voice my opinion. I think for me, and I'm probably stating the obvious, but I think, and triggered a little bit by Don's model, because as Don was sharing that, I instantly began to think of the people who occupy some of those roles. So I've done some work in the past with British wheelchair basketball. And so I'm instantly kind of going, well, is that so-and-so that could link to so-and-so? And how does that link to that person? So I think, tied into some other comments, it is about trying to, I think, understand the people in your community of practice, and equally what they're trying to get out of it. As Holly said, you know, if you force them to go in there because it's an attendance and they're ticking a box to say that they're there, do they get anything from it? But equally, the person that doesn't contribute but is absorbing it and trying to synthesize it, and as we probably know, and I know this is probably a topic for another webinar, learning can't be captured in, you know, a survey post the session. It's got to be something that's going to be a long-term change of behavior. So for me, it's really about understanding people's motives for being there, their story for being there, and kind of what their expectations are out of it as well. And then equally being able to kind of go, well, that's not the agenda I've got, but let's go with that because there's some territory that I probably hadn't even realized before. So for me, that's been the most powerful thing, is kind of relating it back to people and how we work with people, which we're all kind of in the business of doing, I think.
Yeah, and just to carry on from that, an equally important thing to think about is who's not there that should be there in your social learning space.
Absolutely.
And it might not. Sorry, Tiago.
Well, I'd like to make a link from what John mentioned on the chat before. He was saying that we need to be aware with the hypo in the room, which is the highest individual, highest paying individual in the room. And it is very interesting to that we need to understand the power relations involved in that. But we need also to enable an environment in which people are going to be engaged. Yes, thanks for offering, John. I know you have a lot of experience, but at the beginning of the meeting today, we said, does anyone here would like to share as well? And Ashley, although you're from Canada, we've never met before. You're not one of our friends. You're not someone who has inside knowledge. Well, at least not mine. Maybe you know Diane. But it's like, if you create a space in which people can raise their hand and voice their opinions, you can learn from there. And if you create a culture that, well, everybody has something to collaborate with, everybody has value, then that person could be. I think a person is very powerful, but the culture, it's more powerful than one single person. And when we talk about creating values, as we reflect about the strategic value that we can create, what are the mission goals? What are the mission? What is the goal? What is the vision of the organization? Or what is the vision of the community we're trying to create? It is an open culture of learning in which everybody has chance to raise their hands and speak. Amazing. Then it's easier to deal with people who are very dominating, let's say. And the enabling value is, well, if we don't have a space like this in which the facilitators said, okay, we want to make something different. And to make it different, we want to have the correct technology to allow that. It has to be Zoom. We have to have people with Wi-Fi and microphones and videos. So it's thinking all the time about how can we enable the culture and the vision that we have to create those other types of values and to make this community thrive. Because as the whole point of the myth chapter is, it is not easy. It does not have to have one master practitioner, but we have to have support from many different people who are passionate about and who want to care to make a difference. And we'll start paying attention, because this motivation feeds forward everything that we're doing. If we see that, if we can start to realize the results and the changes we are able to create. Sorry, Don, I think I cut you.
No, that totally fine. You more than amply covered what I was going to say. There are some wonderful questions in the chat. Sorry, in the Google Doc coming as well that we should have a look at. I don't know how much time we've got left to address some of those. We won't be able to do them all today or live.
We've got 2 minutes left, Don.
Oh dear. Okay. I don't know what the best thing is to do then in that case. Tiago, Diane, what should we do with those questions that have been asked that we haven't addressed today? We should follow up on those.
We can follow up on them. So if people just make sure they got that document saved or linked to their drive, and we'll go through in the next 10 days or so and try and respond to you.
Oh, that's the thing. Social learning is what we are passionate about. So when they say you have 1 hour, Diane and I and Donkey, let's ask for half an hour more. And then when they give us half an hour more, we're saying, okay, but what about making a live environment in which people can continue the conversation? So we will share as well. We will be receiving from Jen and Amy probably a follow-up with the access to the mural, so you can play with the tool. Feel free to do so. Feel free to add something if you like so. And feel free to take a look here at many of the resources that we talked today. We have this free book from the Wenger trainers. We have the chapters who are open access. And we have, again, the model from the Coach Canada. So even if you're not participating live, you're watching this, give it a try. Find out. There's so much great information that it is not about information, but can spark great conversations. Then is the necessary to create great relationships and great connections. Yeah, thanks again, Amy, Jenny. For inviting us to this, this great opportunity.
Thank you so much, Tiago, Don, and Diane. Just to answer Darren's question, yes, we are recording tonight's session, and it will be available on the YouTube channel, which we'll post onto Twitter soon, and we'll send out an email to everyone to let them know it's available. So yeah, thanks so much again. If you are thinking about designing a community of practice, then you've got no excuses now. You've got the materials, you've got the webinar. I found the Coach Canada link to that document extremely helpful. Thanks so much, Diane, for that. So yeah, thank you so much again, and thanks for making it interactive. So in terms of take-home messages, I've learned a lot on how to, think a little bit more outside the box in terms of creating more interactive and innovative webinars. So thanks for that. Just really quickly, I know everyone's kind of got to shoot off, but I just wanted to share next month's webinar with you. Hopefully you can see that. So that's next month, and it links on seamlessly from some of the discussions we've been having with some of the members today. Colin Cronin is coming to talk about myths around care, common misconceptions around care and coaching, and I'll also post the Eventbrite link in the chat now, but you'll also be able to access that via our Eventbrite page. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thanks for engaging, Ashley, Holly, Richard and John. I really appreciate your engagement and hope everyone enjoys the rest of your evening.
Thanks. Yes, thanks to our mural participants especially.
Thank you.